Aloha and welcome to Faith and Family First, the Triple F podcast. I'm Jim Hochberg. I'm hosting today with Eva Andrade, and we're going to talk about because you've heard us many, many times talk about how laws are passed and all that stuff. Well, what if you can't get laws passed that way and you go the settlement consent decree way? We're going to talk about that. Come on, stick around. So, hey, Eva, I know that you studied really hard because you didn't know what this topic was.
No, and I tell people all the time, I definitely don't know everything about everything. But what I do have is a passion to learn, and that is true. And when you said we were going to talk about, in a very general way, consent decrees, I was like, okay, I thought, I'll get this done. And then I actually watched a fantastic hour and a half presentation that was put on by the Federalist Society. So I give a shout out to the Federalist Society. I'm not an attorney.
I'm a member of the Federalist Society. I double shout you.
Yeah, well, and they did a fantastic job. And I'm learning that our country has laws. We have elections. We have people put into position to make decisions. And then we have people making decisions that were not voted on by the people, and things that they do affect.
And it's actually political activism behind it. And it could be either political activism in an administrative agency, or it could be political activism by like a private nonprofit group or whatever, that kind of a thing.
And it was funny because Jim, kind of sent me on this learning thing. And then it was funny, a light bulb went on, because I remember them saying that part of the immigration problem today is because there was a consent decree that was done. And that caused this craziness on the way that they're handling immigration. So I went, aha. So I'm happy to say that when you're listening and viewing the show today, you are also going to learn something. I would think there might be some of you that know this because there are some.
We got really smart participators here.
We do. But for those of you that don't know, stay tuned and hang in there, because I think that this is another piece to participation in our governmental process.
And we're not just talking about this because I thought it was interesting and I wanted Eva to learn about it. No, we're talking about this because currently in Congress, there is a law that was proposed. It's a bill, and it was proposed in 2017 when Donald Trump was the president. And it's basically H.R. 2708 in the House and S.R. in the Senate, S.R. 1247. And the bills are called Sunshine for Regulations and Regulatory Decrees and Settlement Act, which means, as we're going to talk about, there's a lot of underhanded secret stuff in this process of consent decrees and litigation. And there are these two bills in Congress that we want you to look at and see if you support them, because they're trying to get it out in the open, which is what the sunshine means. So tell me, what was the most interesting thing that you learned about consent decrees that our viewers might also find interesting?
Well, what I did learn, because again, the Federalist Society, and I'm going to put that link for those of you that want to watch it. If you have the time, please do it, is that you're going to have good reasons to do a consent decree on certain things. And then you're going to have reasons to be concerned about the use of a consent decree. But I think the biggest thing that I learned is that, again, it involves the process of the people. When a consent,
but it doesn't.
Well,
that's the problem. But it absolutely excludes the people.
I will disagree with you on one thing. You're right that when the process of a consent decree is being used, you're right. But I'm talking about people knowing that there's a consent decree that's being used and how they can.
And when it's over, it's too late, but they're stuck with it.
They're stuck with it. But hopefully after the conversation today, people are their antenna's going to go up if they hear, there's going to be a consent decree. And then, so I think that just like I had to learn, I think what you need to do, Jim, is start a little bit slow and explain to people what is a consent decree.
Absolutely. That's where I was going next. So a consent decree means that a judge somewhere approved a decree settling a lawsuit. And you don't really get consent decrees, I think, outside of maybe divorce court, in regular suing for money or car crashes or whatever like that, because those are singular events that don't really have ongoing life. But like divorce and child custody, that case has ongoing life until the kids are 18 or whatever. But when you have civil rights or other kind of environmentalism or election public interest issues at the heart of litigation, the end of the litigation in this settlement decree has ongoing life because those are public interest events. So there's two ways that a lawsuit can start where it can end up in a settlement by a judge-ordered consent decree that then affects everybody as if it was legislated by either a Congress in the federal or the state legislature in Hawaii. And that's either the government can sue like the federal government. Like right now, Merrick Garland has the Attorney General's Department and the Justice Department suing local police departments over civil rights violations in policing. And
we probably have viewers and listeners that have kind of not really put it together with a consent decree, but that's what happened in Chicago, right? I mean,
Correct.
They had a lot of stuff happening in the police department there, and it was on the federal level, right, that this consent decree
Correct.
developed. And so now you have a police department that is actually being run with
by a
all
monitor,
of these rules.
By a monitor, which is not an elected person either.
That's appointed by the court.
Correct.
And
or by agreement of the parties settling.
So here in Hawaii, we don't have elected judges.
Correct.
So what that means is they're appointed by the governor. So
and confirmed by the Senate.
So
we do vote for governor and senator. We got to vote our values.
This is an election season, and I know that the primary has already happened, but I think people are looking now to the general election. But again, we're going to the point of why people need to pay attention to who they're voting for. So in the state of Hawaii, you will have a governor who is going to appoint judges, and then you're going to have people in the Senate that are going to approve.
Correct.
Whoever was appointed.
So then that's one way these can happen, where the federal government sues a local government, like for policing, for elections, Office of Elections in Georgia. They had this consent decree running their elections. The consent decree came out of, what's that lady's name in Georgia that didn't win for governor?
Oh, yes.
Her nonprofit sued.
Yes.
Because they didn't like the way the elections were in terms of ballot IDs and all that stuff. That one was a quote unquote friendly lawsuit. They weren't really adversaries. They both wanted the same result, but the legislature hadn't passed that law. So they did litigation and they sued and settled with the new rules being the ones the legislature didn't want to make, which was no ID. I forget what all the points were. So it can also be not adversarial, kind of a fake lawsuit, kind of like Roe v. Wade was. And it ends up with the court approving a settlement agreement by non-adversarial parties to make the government enforce rules that the legislative body never enacted. Okay? And then they get a monitor that the parties that weren't adversarial in the lawsuit agree to have, which is going to be a friendly monitor on their side.
Well, and that was a point that came across in this presentation that I saw, is that if you have a good monitor and the monitor is going to be making sure that they provide information to a community, which some of them have done. According to these presentations, there have been some good monitors that they do on social media. They let people know what the process is and all that, and that's great. But if you have a bad monitor, they don't need to give any information to people because they only answer to the judge.
Correct. Well, and the way we've seen so much of the federal government running since President Biden got installed, they can put everything on social media and not let anybody comment, and it can be all absolutely wrong, not true, and not, reliable, but they're sharing it with the public.
Absolutely.
And so this is, and the other thing about this that people don't really assume is part of the thing is when this nonprofit files this lawsuit, guess what they get as part of the settlement? Attorney fees. Ha
And
millions in
well,
attorney
and I
fees.
was going to say that what came across strongly too is that some of these monitors are like in the case of Chicago, the monitor there is getting paid more than you would even be to be a police officer in the state.
Well, of course, he's monitoring.
Well, it's just interesting that when you think about this, you know, that in a time where we need good police officers and we need support for the men and women that become police officers, that it actually seems to me that money goes in places that are actually not helping our government anymore. It's actually hurting us.
Okay, so I really appreciate good business models. Things that are profitable, they work, they have longevity because the system that they're using works, right? Imagine this. You have an environmentalism nonprofit, and they can't get the state legislature to ban plastic bottles. So although the environmental agency in the state wants to ban plastic bottles, because the legislature hasn't created a law banning plastic or empowering the environmental department to do it, they can't. So their nonprofit and the agency get together, do one of these friendly lawsuits where they agree to ban the bottles, which forces the legislation on the legislature, makes the environmental agency make the rules for it, pays the legal fees to the nonprofit. That is a fabulous business model. Now the nonprofit has all these extra attorney fees they can pay for the next case. And they go hunt around for the next thing they want to force on the people that the legislature doesn't want to do, file another friendly lawsuit. And it's kind of like an underground way of legislating things. Now, we had that actually happen here in Hawaii, 20 years ago, which was some parents had, and this actually was a good case. I'm not complaining about the result. Some parents had kids with special needs in the public school that the education department had not made rules to take care of the special needs kids because they didn't have the money to do what special kids needed.
So the
right?
kids weren't getting the services they
there was a lawsuit
needed.
here that settled and forced the Department of Education to do this, i.e., the independent educational...
The IEPs, yeah.
The IEPs.
Yeah.
That came out of one of these friendly lawsuits. So it's not always a bad thing.
So it was a consent decree.
It was a consent decree.
Okay.
Yeah. And by the way, the Attorney General at the time approved this multi-million-dollar attorney's fees to the law firm that brought the lawsuit. And then within the same calendar year, governorship changed and the Attorney General changed, and he went to work in that firm, which that bothered me.
Well, here in Hawaii, we call it the revolving door, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can see these same people, like you know, a good example of that is Kai Kahele, right? I mean, he's moved around.
Yeah. Josh
Green has moved around. I mean, this is what people do in Hawaii. Okay, so let's get back to the consent decree. So in order for us to actually get into the show today, there was a situation that got your blood boiling. So why don't you get to the reason that we jumped into this whole subject?
I don't even remember what it was. Help me out.
It was a New York Times article that actually came out because of the policing stuff.
Well, because Attorney General Merrick Garland last year, 2021. Okay, so this Sunshine for Regulations and Regulatory Decrees and Settlement Act, which was proposed when Trump was president, is because when Trump was president, he told the agencies to quit doing this, which is a good thing because lawmaking should come from elected people. That's the Founding Fathers' basic rule. Well, when Biden got installed as president, his Attorney General Merrick Garland gave a memo saying we're going back to the consent decree lawsuit process of rulemaking and legislation, because that's the difference between the nature of, I would say, totalitarian top-down government and the Republican form of government that we have, which is bottom-up. We vote for people, we get rid of them if we don't like the laws they pass. This consent decree thing is very undemocratic. And it did... my blood doesn't really boil But I didn't like going backwards. But that's why we have to realize when we vote for president, it's not just the guy in the White House. It's all these people that work in the agencies.
I was going to say the connection that I saw that got your blood boiling in my words was because you are so passionate about Merrick Garland and how he connects to everything. And when he's put in a position to make all these decisions and do all these things, when there may be a conflict of interest in some of the choices that he makes.
And the cabinet is kind of incompetent. There's all these people working in these cabinet positions that, like transportation, Buttigieg, he doesn't know anything about transportation. Health and Human Services, Becerra, he's a lawyer. He's not even a doctor. I mean, it's like the labor lady. They just got all these people because they check off boxes in the equity view of the current social democrat stuff that our country's going to hell.
You know, one of the things I've learned in my life, and I think this is just a regular comment that sort of applies, when I have friends that have jobs, I'm always amazed at the amount of work they can do because of the relationships they have of the people around them. I am always nervous when I'm around somebody who does everything by themselves all the time, because what that tells me is that person would probably make a really horrible governor, right? I mean, and I think that we have to start doing this when we're looking at people running for office, Jim. I think that we should start looking about how they build relationships around them. Do they work well with people? Because you're going to have to work with other people to get things done. And don't just say, you know what, my friends from now on are going to be diverse. I have decided that my closest friends are going to represent every group, because that might work. But I think
that makes you very virtuous.
Well, it does. But when you're running a business,
you'll go broke.
We have to start putting people. I know, and I'm going to give a little quick shout out to Alan Cardenas. He's our board chairman. He always talks about this. He talks about getting the people on the bus, but then getting the right people in the right places on the bus. I don't want a bus driver who has never driven before. I don't care how nice the bus is, and I don't care who's sitting next to me over there. In fact, I laugh even about, people that will come out and say, I have knowledge on this because I'm a doctor. And I'm like, well, what kind of a doctor are you? And they go, well, I have a PhD in
library education,
sanitation.
Dr. Jill.
Yeah, if my leg has been cut and it needs to be operated on, I do not want a doctor of sanitation coming in there and giving me a reading on that.
I don't care who my doctor has sex with. I want a brain doctor operating on my brain.
Yes, and you know what? I don't care what your grades were in school either. Because you may have gotten straight A's, but if you have never operated on somebody, I think I'd rather have somebody that has the experience as well as the degree. So I think we need to break out of this, and I think that
we actually aren't harnessed by it. It's the other half of the country that's harnessed by this virtue of diversity and equity, which has nothing to do with progress, success, or profitability.
No, and I don't know if it's maybe because I'm a Hawaii girl, but I don't look at people and see their ethnicity. I look at somebody and I see whether they're funny, because to me, humor is super important.
Yep.
I don't care what their hairstyle is or how they dress. I tend to just be around people whose heart is good, who can make me laugh. And you know what? I will say this because it's true. I have close friends that disagree with me on every political issue there is out there, but they respect where I'm coming from. I respect where they're coming from. Does that stop me from trying to change their mind? No, because I am who I am. And it doesn't stop them from trying to change my mind. But we don't call each other names. We don't put each other in boxes. And I remember, you remember in the 80s.
Can we talk about consent decrees?
We can. But let me just finish this because I started it and people are going to be like, well, because I get the emails after. What were you going to say? All right. Do you remember in the 80s when everybody was going through those personality trait things? And they kept saying, stop putting people in boxes. Now it's like everybody wants to be put in these weird boxes. We have changed so much. We wouldn't recognize our country. So yes, let's talk about consent decrees.
So why did President Trump not want to continue doing consent decrees?
Because he wanted the people to participate in the process.
Okay. President Obama was the president for how many years?
8.
2 terms,
Right.
8 years. Do you know that for 6 of those years, the GOP controlled the House?
No.
From
Did
2010
they?
to
Yes,
16,
they did.
right?
They did, yes.
Which means that they weren't going to pass any of the bills that were of interest to the Democrats that they didn't also agree with. So the way Congress works is the House passes and the Senate passes the same bill, and then it goes to the president for signature.
Right.
When after the first 2 years, which is when, of course, we got Obamacare, after that, from 2010 to 16, Obama really had a hard time getting the hard left legislation passed because the Republicans ran the House.
So he had to do something to get his things
Do you
done.
know how many consent decrees were enacted?
I don't know the number, but I know there were quite a few.
There were. So between 2005 and 16, the EPA enacted 23 regulations that cost $20 billion via settlement consent decrees. From 2009 to now, federal agencies have done $50 million.
Money, not decrees.
$50 million
Right.
in costs to plaintiffs under EPA consent decrees, lawyer fees.
Wow.
Okay. It's really a bigger deal than people even think if they've heard about them and they remember the immigration florist.
So while
consent
everybody
decree.
who's listening to this right now is suffering through this economy and they are wondering where all this money is going to, if, as predicted, the Republicans take the House, and if by some sheer chance the Republicans take the Senate, are you estimating that we could see a rise in the number of consent decrees, because we will be in a situation where you'll have a Democratic president and a Republican House and a Republican Senate?
Well, I don't know if consent decrees, because remember, the federal government attorney general can file lawsuits against Texas over immigration things and have a consent decree. So what I think might happen is there'll be a lot of vetoes by the president, actually. But you want to talk about the Flores one because you brought it up, and it's one that people are probably more familiar with.
Well,
the immigration one.
Well,
let's get into the specifics because it's interesting.
I know that you'll have some thoughts on this too, but I think what was interesting to me is I've been hearing for years that part of the reason they're unable to fix the immigration problem is because of what happened in California. That's what they kept talking about, and they were referring to the Flores case. And I didn't make the connection until I heard about this, that it was this consent decree that set us up to where certain parts of the immigration system that really needs to be fixed cannot be fixed because of the consent decree. So I did not read the the consent decree to tell you what the details are, but I know that it has to do with the separating of kids from their parents. I know that that's part of the problem.
So what I recall happened is when illegal immigrants were apprehended and they were held in, this is back in the 90s.
Right.
This is when Clinton was president, okay?
Yes.
This is way, way back, okay?
So you can't even blame Trump for this one. This one goes way back.
And the unaccompanied minors were held, and they like to call it incarceration or jail or whatever, but it's an immigration holding cell. We've seen them. There's like 100 kids in a big fenced room.
We all saw the cages. I'm sorry. We all saw the cages.
Well, okay. And so the immigration was finding these unaccompanied minors illegally entering the country, and they had to put them somewhere, and they put them in fenced areas where they could keep control of them and take care of them. And immigration activists sued because the idea was that the kids should be reunited with the people they were illegally coming here to see better than being locked up as an illegal immigrant. And this is 1997-ish, right? Mm-hmm. And so they sued and they settled. And the settlement under Clinton's presidency, he was running the immigration service back then, which was before 2001. So it wasn't the current huge immigration. It just was immigration and naturalization back then. I think it was a friendly lawsuit. I'm not sure. But they sued and they settled and said that the kids had to be released, which is kind of crazy because it just led to more and more and more illegal immigration of these. Remember how many undocumented minors were like in these flooding caravans and stuff like that, and whatever.
But
anyway.
I had to take a step back in my own personal opinion about this, because I keep saying that everyone understands that the immigration problem needs to be fixed. And I kept saying that. Why aren't we fixing the problem? I didn't realize that it wasn't just going to be some bill that would move through Congress that could fix the problem.
Well, it could be if Congress did it.
Well, but they keep going back to this Flores settlement,
No,
as
but
part
if
of the
Congress,
issue.
So this is a settlement of a case, right? If Congress passes a law that covers the entire country, it should take care of the problem.
So that's what I'm saying.
But some in Congress like the settlement agreement. They don't want to change
that's
it.
my
They
point.
could change
They could
it.
do it, but these are the people that are saying we can't because of the consent decree. But that's not true.
Well,
they
because
could. They
by
could.
negotiating in Congress, they won't get what they already have through the consent decree, so they don't want to.
So what's your action items for people?
So my action item is HR 2708 in the House, SR 1247 in the Senate. Those bills are being heard now in the committees. It's called the Sunshine, which means shine light on, Sunshine for Regulations and Regulatory Decrees and Settlement Act. What this legislation is doing is telling the courts and the monitors and the parties and the departments that are involved in this sue and settle scheme, you have to make all this stuff public. You can't hide in behind these ways of passing laws that the voters, don't have anything to do with.
So basically, we're not saying that consent decrees can't be used for a good purpose if there is some situation that needs to be done. But what we are saying is that if you are watching and listening to this show, you still have to participate in the process. And right now you have an opportunity to do so because of the two bills that
And we'll put a link. I think I sent you the link to this act, the two resolutions. You can put them on the thing and people can
So
grab
if you
them.
are on the beautiful island of Kauai and we give you a shout out and you're listening to this, or you are listening on Oahu, and that's on Oahu, it's 10:40 a.m. and on Kauai, it's KESU FM. Make sure that you go to the YouTube channel or hawaiifamilyforum.org so that you can get these links, because it is important that you weigh in.
And when you have a chance to go to a campaign thing for governor here and you get a chance to ask a question, ask them, say, what do you think about consent decrees rather than legislating from the elected people in the House and the Senate?
And right after you like, share, and subscribe this video, I want you to call somebody and say, ask me about a consent decree so I can tell you about it.
She's excited because she didn't know what I was talking
Well,
about.
I think that we should all learn, and that's what we need to do in order to make this place a better home for you and me. So we will see you next week. Mahalo, everybody.
Aloha.